The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace. Thomas Whitmore stood at attention, his red uniform pristine, his bearskin hat perfectly positioned. He had served as a royal guard for 15 years, and in all that time, he had never imagined he would face a mission like the one handed to him that gray October morning. The summons came from the Lord Chamberlain himself. Thomas was escorted through corridors he had only glimpsed during his rounds, past paintings of monarchs long gone, until he reached a small office tucked away in the administrative wing. The Lord Chamberlain, an elderly man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a grave expression, gestured for Thomas to sit. "What I'm about to tell you must remain confidential," the Lord Chamberlain began, his fingers drumming nervously on a leather folder. "We have a delicate situation that requires someone we can trust completely. Your commanding officer recommended you." Thomas nodded, his heart beating faster. In his years of service, he had protected royals at public events, stood watch during state dinners, and maintained his post through blistering heat and freezing rain. But the tone in the Lord Chamberlain's voice suggested this was different. The old man opened the folder and slid a photograph across the desk. It showed a magnificent tiara, diamonds catching the light like frozen stars with sapphires set in an intricate platinum setting. Thomas recognized it immediately. Every guard knew the crown jewels, but this particular piece held special significance. It had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II, a personal favorite she had worn on numerous occasions. "The Cambridge lover's knot tiara," the Lord Chamberlain said quietly. "After Her Majesty's passing, an inventory was conducted of all royal jewelry. This piece, however, cannot be located in the palace vaults." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "It's missing?" "Not exactly missing," the Lord Chamberlain corrected. "We know where it is. That's the problem." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "After the funeral, several personal items were distributed according to the late Queen's wishes. However, there appears to have been a misunderstanding. The tiara was taken to Camilla's residence, Ray Mill House in Wiltshire. It should have been returned to the royal collection, but it remains there." The weight of what was being asked began to settle on Thomas's shoulders. Ray Mill House was Queen Camilla's private retreat, a place she had owned long before marrying King Charles. It was her sanctuary, away from the formality of palace life. "You want me to retrieve it?" Thomas asked, his voice steady despite his racing thoughts. "We need someone who understands the sensitivity of the situation," the Lord Chamberlain explained. "This isn't about accusations or presumptions of wrongdoing. It's simply a matter of protocol. The tiara belongs to the crown, not to any individual. It must be returned to the royal collection where it can be properly preserved and, when appropriate, worn by future generations." Thomas understood the unspoken complexities. Approaching the Queen Consort's private residence to reclaim a piece of jewelry was fraught with potential for misunderstanding and offense. If handled poorly, it could create a scandal or damage relationships within the royal family at a time when unity was essential. "Why not send an official letter or have someone from the royal household contact her staff?" Thomas asked. The Lord Chamberlain sighed. "We did 3 weeks ago. The response was that the Queen Consort was unaware of any such tiara being at her property. Her staff claimed they would look into it, but nothing has been returned. We've sent 2 more polite inquiries. Each time we're told they're investigating. Meanwhile, time passes and the situation becomes more awkward." Thomas studied the photograph again. The tiara was priceless, not just in monetary terms, but in historical significance. Queen Elizabeth had received it as a wedding gift, and it had been in the royal family for generations before that. Its absence from the collection was more than an administrative oversight. It was a break in the chain of royal heritage. "What exactly would my role be?" Thomas asked. "You would travel to Ray Mill House, present yourself as representing the royal household, and personally ensure the tiara is located and returned. You'll carry official documents authorizing the retrieval. You'll be courteous, respectful, but firm. The tiara must come back with you." Thomas felt the magnitude of the task. He was being asked to walk into the private home of the Queen Consort and essentially search for property that may or may not be there, possibly against the wishes of those present. It could go smoothly, or it could become a confrontation that would echo through the palace for years to come. "When would I leave?" he asked. "Tomorrow morning. We've arranged for a car and driver. You'll have a letter from the King's private secretary, though His Majesty is not personally involved in the details. This is being handled as a matter of royal property management." The Lord Chamberlain stood, signaling the meeting was ending. Thomas, I won't pretend this will be easy, but it's necessary. That tiara represents continuity, history, and respect for what the late Queen built. It cannot simply disappear into private hands, no matter whose hands they are. That evening, Thomas sat in his small flat near the palace, the official documents spread before him. He read through the authorization letter multiple times, memorizing every word. The language was diplomatic but clear. The tiara was crown property and must be returned immediately to the Tower of London's jewel house for cataloguing and storage. He thought about his own brief encounter with Queen Elizabeth years ago. She had been reviewing the guards, and when she passed him, she had paused and asked how long he had served. Her eyes had been kind, genuinely interested. He had stammered a response, overwhelmed by her presence. She had smiled and moved on, but that moment had stayed with him. He felt as though, in some small way, he was now serving her memory. The next morning, dressed in civilian clothes as instructed, Thomas climbed into the back of a dark sedan. The driver, a quiet man named Robert who worked for the royal household, nodded greeting but said little as they pulled away from London and headed west toward Wiltshire. The autumn countryside rolled past, fields turning gold and brown under gray skies. Thomas rehearsed what he would say, how he would handle potential objections or hostility. Raymill House appeared through a break in the hedgerows, a beautiful Cotswold stone manor surrounded by manicured gardens. It looked peaceful, almost idyllic, with ivy climbing the walls and flower beds still showing late blooms. This was a private sanctuary, and Thomas was about to intrude upon it with a mission that could easily be seen as an accusation. The car crunched along the gravel drive and stopped near the main entrance. Thomas took a deep breath, gathered his documents, and stepped out. Before he could reach the door, it opened, and a woman in her 50s wearing a cardigan and practical shoes emerged. She had the bearing of someone who managed the household, probably the head housekeeper. "You must be Mr. Whitmore," she said, her tone neutral but her eyes wary. "We received word you were coming." "I'm Mrs. Patterson, the house manager." Thomas nodded politely. "Thank you for receiving me. I understand this is unexpected, but I'm here on official business regarding an item that belongs to the royal collection." Mrs. Patterson's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "You'd better come inside." The interior of Raymill House was warm and comfortable, far less formal than the palace. Personal photographs lined the hallway and fresh flowers sat in vases on side tables. It felt like a real home, someone's refuge from the demands of public life. Thomas felt a pang of sympathy for what his arrival must represent. An intrusion, a suggestion that something improper had occurred. Mrs. Patterson led him to a sitting room with windows overlooking the garden. "Please wait here. I'll need to make some calls." Thomas sat, his documents on his lap, and waited. Minutes stretched into a half hour. He could hear muffled voices from another part of the house. Urgent conversations. Finally, Mrs. Patterson returned, accompanied by a younger woman carrying a tablet, presumably an assistant or secretary. "Mr. Whitmore," Mrs. Patterson began, sitting across from him, "we've reviewed your letter, and I've spoken with Her Majesty's private secretary in London. I need to be frank with you. We are not aware of any tiara being present at this property. After the late Queen's funeral, several items were indeed brought here temporarily, but they were all returned to the palace within 2 weeks." Thomas had anticipated this response. He opened his folder and removed a detailed inventory list. According to palace records, the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara was signed out to Raymill House on September 19th. It was part of a collection of personal items that the Queen Consort wished to view privately. "There's no record of its return." The younger woman with the tablet frowned. "I handle all transfers of items to and from this property. I don't recall any tiara." Thomas maintained his composure. "The paperwork indicates it was received by a Ms. Hartley. Would that be someone on your staff?" Mrs. Patterson's face paled slightly. "Elaine Hartley. She was a temporary assistant we employed during that period. She's no longer with us." "When did she leave your employment?" Thomas asked. "About a month ago. She was only here for the transition period after Her Majesty became Queen Consort. There was so much coming and going, so many arrangements." Mrs. Patterson looked genuinely concerned now. "Are you suggesting she took something?" Thomas shook his head. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply trying to locate Crown property. Could you tell me where I might find Miss Hartley now?" The younger woman consulted her tablet. I can get her contact information from personnel records. But if she signed for something and didn't log it properly, that's a serious matter. First, Thomas said gently but firmly, I need to search this property. If the tiara is here, perhaps it was stored somewhere and forgotten in the midst of everything else. If it's not here, then we can pursue other avenues. Mrs. Patterson stiffened. Search the Queen Consort's private home? That's highly irregular. I'll need authorization from her private secretary before I can allow that. Thomas had expected this obstacle too. He removed another document, this one bearing the royal seal. This authorization comes from the Lord Chamberlain's office and has the backing of the King's private secretary. The tiara is not personal property. It belongs to the Crown. Its location must be established and every reasonable step must be taken to recover it. The two women exchanged glances. Mrs. Patterson finally nodded. Very well, but I will accompany you throughout. And I want it noted that we are cooperating fully under protest. Her Majesty will not be pleased to learn her home was searched. I understand, Thomas said, standing, and I appreciate your cooperation. I'll be as quick and discreet as possible. They began in the rooms where items from the palace had been temporarily stored. A guest bedroom on the second floor had been used as a sorting area during the chaotic weeks following Queen Elizabeth's death. Boxes that had once held jewelry, photographs, and personal effects were now empty and stacked in a corner. Thomas examined each one carefully, checking for any overlooked items or documentation. In a dressing room, he found several jewelry cases, each carefully labeled. They contained beautiful pieces, but none was the tiara he sought. He opened every drawer, checked every shelf, always conscious of Mrs. Patterson's watchful presence. He wasn't there to pry into private matters, only to find one specific item. An hour passed, then two. They moved through the house methodically. Thomas checked a library where some royal memorabilia had been displayed, a study where official documents were kept, even a safe where valuable items were stored. The tiara was nowhere to be found. As they returned to the sitting room, Mrs. Patterson's initial defensiveness had shifted to genuine concern. If that tiara was delivered here and we can't locate it, this is a serious problem. Elaine handled many of the deliveries during that time. She seemed competent, came with good references. Thomas sat down, his mind working through the implications. I'll need all the information you have on Ms. Hartley. Address, phone number, previous employers, and any CCTV footage from the day the tiara was delivered. The younger assistant nodded. We have security cameras at the entrances. I can pull that footage. While they gathered the information, Thomas called the Lord Chamberlain's office to report. The conversation was brief and grim. If the tiara had been stolen or sold, it would become a criminal matter. The police would need to be involved and the scandal would be impossible to contain. Mrs. Patterson returned with a file on Elaine Hartley. Thomas scanned it quickly. She was 32 years old, had worked at several country estates and private clubs, always with positive references. Her address was listed as a flat in Salisbury, about 20 miles away. Her phone number went straight to voicemail when Thomas tried it. The security footage from September 19th, the assistant said, setting up a laptop, shows 3 deliveries that day. Here's the palace courier vehicle arriving at 10:30 in the morning. They watched the grainy footage. A van pulled up and a uniformed courier got out. He went to the back of the van and removed several boxes. A woman Thomas assumed was Elaine Hartley met him at the door. They talked briefly and she signed something on a clipboard. The courier handed over the boxes and left. Can we see what happened next? Thomas asked. The assistant switched camera angles, showing the interior hallway. Elaine carried the boxes inside one at a time, disappearing toward the back of the house. The footage continued, showing staff members moving about their duties, but Elaine didn't reappear with the boxes. Where did she take them? Thomas asked. Mrs. Patterson frowned. Based on that direction, probably the storage room we converted into a temporary sorting area. That's where we kept everything before cataloging and returning items. They had already searched that room thoroughly. Thomas thought for a moment. Did Ms. Hartley have access to a vehicle? She had a small car, a blue Fiat, Mrs. Patterson said. She parked it around the side of the house near the staff entrance. Thomas felt a cold realization forming. Did anyone ever check what she put in that car? The room fell silent. Mrs. Patterson's face showed she understood the implication. We trusted our staff. There was no reason to suspect anyone of theft, especially not theft of royal property. Everything was so hectic during that time, so many things being moved and organized. Thomas reviewed the timeline in his mind. The tiara had arrived on September 19th. Elaine Hartley had left her position in mid-October. 4 weeks had passed since then. Plenty of time for a stolen tiara to be hidden, sold, or moved beyond recovery. The thought made his chest tighten with a sense of failure he hadn't yet earned, but could feel approaching. "I need to visit Ms. Hartley's address in Salisbury," Thomas said, gathering his papers. "Today, right now." Mrs. Patterson stood. "I'm coming with you. If someone on my staff took royal property, I need to know. And if she's innocent, she deserves the chance to clear her name with a witness present." Thomas wanted to refuse, to keep this as official and controlled as possible, but he understood her position. Her reputation was now tied to this missing tiara. The drive to Salisbury took 30 minutes through winding country roads. Thomas used the time to make more calls, updating the Lord Chamberlain's office and requesting that palace. Security pulled any additional records on Elaine Hartley's background check. The address led them to a modest apartment building in a quiet neighborhood. Thomas rang the bell for flat 3B. No answer. He tried again, holding the buzzer longer. Still nothing. An elderly woman emerged from the ground floor flat, eyeing them suspiciously. "Looking for someone?" she asked. "Elaine Hartley," Thomas said politely. "Do you know if she's home?" The woman shook her head. "Haven't seen her in over a week. Come to think of it, haven't seen her much at all lately. Keeps odd hours, that one." "You police?" "Not exactly," Thomas said. "It's important we speak with her." "Have you noticed anything unusual?" The woman considered this. "Well, she had some fancy visitors a few weeks back. Expensive cars, well-dressed people. Didn't seem like her usual crowd. And she moved some boxes out late one night. I only noticed because my cat woke me and I saw her loading her car around midnight." Thomas exchanged a glance with Mrs. Patterson. "Do you know where she might be?"
"Family, friends?"
"Not local, I don't think. She mentioned she was from somewhere up north, Manchester maybe. Said she was saving money to buy her own place. Always talking about wanting something better than this." The woman gestured at the modest building with a dismissive wave. Thomas thanked her and tried Elaine's phone again. This time it didn't even ring, going immediately to a message saying the number was no longer in service. He felt the trail getting colder by the minute. He called the Lord Chamberlain's office again and explained the situation. Within 20 minutes, they had authorization to contact local police. A detective inspector named Morris arrived within an hour. He was a practical man in his 40s, who listened to Thomas's explanation with growing seriousness. When Thomas showed him the documents proving the tiara belonged to the crown and had been signed for by Elaine Hartley, Morris nodded grimly. "This is theft of royal property, which makes it serious. But I'll be honest with you. If she's had several weeks to fence the item, it could be anywhere by now. These pieces often get broken down, stones removed and sold separately. A tiara like that, even the metal alone would be worth a fortune." The thought of Queen Elizabeth's beloved tiara being destroyed for scrap made Thomas feel physically ill. Mrs. Patterson looked equally distressed. "There must be something we can do. Check pawn shops, jewelry dealers, auction houses." Detective Morris was already on his phone, issuing instructions to his team. "We'll put out an alert to all known dealers in high-value jewelry and antiques. We'll also run a full background on Hartley. Check her financial records, see if there's been any unusual activity. But I need you both to understand, recovery is not guaranteed. In fact, with this much time passed, it's unlikely." Thomas refused to accept that. He had been given a mission, and he would see it through. "What about her previous employers? She must have references, people who know her." Morris nodded. "We'll track down everyone she's worked for in the past 5 years. Someone might know where she'd go or who she'd contact if she was trying to sell something valuable." They spent the rest of the afternoon at the police station. Officers pulled phone records, bank statements, and employment history. A picture began to emerge that troubled Thomas deeply. Elaine Hartley had moved between positions frequently, never staying anywhere longer than 6 months. Her references when contacted were oddly vague. One former employer mentioned that some small items had gone missing during her tenure, but nothing was ever proven. "She's a professional," Morris said, studying the information. "This wasn't opportunistic. She specifically targeted positions that would give her access to valuable items in private homes. Your royal household was just her biggest score yet." Mrs. Patterson sat with her head in her hands. I reviewed her application myself. Everything seemed legitimate. How could I have known? You couldn't, Morris assured her. These people are skilled at creating false identities and references. But we will find her. By evening, they had a breakthrough. Elaine's bank records showed a large cash deposit of £15,000 3 weeks earlier, deposited at a branch in Birmingham. It wasn't enough for a tiara worth potentially hundreds of thousands or even millions, but it could be a down payment from a buyer. Thomas and Detective Morris drove to Birmingham that evening, arriving after dark. The bank branch wouldn't open until morning, but Morris had already secured a warrant to review their security footage. They checked into a hotel near the bank and Thomas barely slept. He kept thinking about the tiara, about his promise to retrieve it, about the disappointment if he failed. The next morning, they were at the bank when it opened. The manager, a nervous man who kept adjusting his tie, led them to a back office where they could review security footage from the day Elaine had made her deposit. They watched the screen as a woman matching her description entered the bank, approached a teller and handed over a thick envelope of cash. Can we see her leave? Thomas asked. The manager switched camera angles. They watched Elaine exit the bank and walk to a car parked on the street. But she wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit was waiting for her. They spoke briefly and then both got into the car and drove away. Can we get a license plate? Morris asked. The manager zoomed in as much as the footage allowed. The plate was partially visible. Morris wrote down the number and immediately called it in to his colleagues. Within minutes, they had a result. The car was registered to a dealer in antiques and fine art named Marcus Ashford, with an address in Mayfair, London. Thomas felt a surge of hope. She sold it to him. Or she's trying to. Morris was more cautious. Maybe, or he's an accomplice. Either way, we need to move fast. If he realizes we're onto him, he'll hide or destroy evidence. They drove back to London immediately, coordinating with Metropolitan Police along the way. By mid-afternoon, they arrived at an elegant townhouse in Mayfair that served as both Ashford's residence and his gallery. The ground floor displayed carefully curated antiques, paintings, and decorative objects. Everything screamed wealth and discretion. A young woman at a desk greeted them coolly. Do you have an appointment? Mr. Ashford sees clients by appointment only. Detective Morris showed his badge. This isn't a social call. We need to speak with Mr. Ashford immediately regarding stolen property. The woman's composed expression cracked slightly. She picked up a phone and spoke in hushed tones. A moment later, a man in his 60s descended the stairs. Marcus Ashford was distinguished, with silver hair and an expensive suit. His face showed polite concern, but his eyes were calculating. Gentlemen, how can I help you? He asked smoothly. Morris cut straight to the point. We're investigating the theft of royal property, specifically a tiara belonging to the crown. We have evidence connecting you to the suspected thief, Elaine Hartley. Ashford's expression didn't change, which Thomas found telling. An innocent person would show shock or confusion. Ashford simply nodded. I see. Perhaps we should discuss this in my private office. He led them upstairs to a luxurious office overlooking the street. Ashford sat behind his desk, steepled his fingers, and regarded them calmly. I assume you have a warrant? Morris held up the document. To search these premises and seize any stolen property. That won't be necessary, Ashford said, surprising them both. I am a legitimate dealer. When Ms. Hartley approached me several weeks ago offering to sell an exceptional piece of jewelry, I conducted due diligence. She provided documentation suggesting she had inherited the item from a distant relative. However, when I researched the piece further, I had concerns about its provenance. Thomas leaned forward. You have the tiara? I have a tiara, Ashford corrected. Whether it's the one you're seeking, I cannot say with certainty. Ms. Hartley became agitated when I requested additional verification of ownership. She withdrew the piece and left. I haven't seen her since. Morris's expression hardened. So you don't have it? I did not say that. Ashford stood and walked to a large painting on the wall. Behind it was a safe. He entered a combination and removed a black velvet case. He placed it on the desk and opened it. There, nestled in white silk, was the Cambridge lover's knot tiara. Even in the office lighting, it was breathtaking. The diamonds caught the light in brilliant flashes and the sapphires glowed with deep blue fire. Thomas felt his breath catch. He had found it. I contacted the art loss register immediately, Ashford continued. When they confirmed my suspicions that this might be connected to the royal family, I secured it in my safe and contacted the palace. I left 3 messages with various departments but received no response. I was planning to contact the police this week if I heard nothing further. Morris examined the tiara carefully, then looked at Thomas. "Can you verify this is the missing piece?" Thomas compared it to the photographs he carried. Every detail matched perfectly. "This is it. This is the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara." Ashford closed the case. "Then I'm pleased to return it to its rightful owners. I have no wish to be involved in any scandal or criminal proceedings. The question now is what happened to the money I gave Miss Hartley?" "You paid her?" Morris asked sharply. "A deposit of £15,000 pending verification of provenance. That verification never came because I discovered the truth. She owes me that money, Detective. I expect you'll recover it when you apprehend her." Thomas wanted to feel relief, but questions nagged at him. "If you had concerns from the beginning, why pay her anything?" Ashford smiled slightly. "Because, Mr. Whitmore, in my business, you sometimes need to secure an item before someone else does. If the piece had been legitimate, it would have been the acquisition of a lifetime. I took a calculated risk. It didn't pay off, but I'm returning royal property, so I'm confident any legal exposure is minimal." Morris wasn't convinced. "You'll still need to make a full statement, and we'll be verifying your story thoroughly." "Of course," Ashford said smoothly. "I have nothing to hide." Thomas carefully took possession of the tiara case. It felt heavier than he expected, weighted with history and responsibility. He had completed his mission, but the victory felt incomplete. Elaine Hartley was still out there, and she had £15,000 that didn't belong to her. As they left the gallery, Morris shook his head. "Ashford's clever. He covered himself perfectly. Even if he suspected it was stolen from the start, he can claim ignorance and good citizenship for returning it. Meanwhile, he's out £15,000, but that's probably pocket change to someone like him." "What about Hartley?" Thomas asked. "We'll find her eventually. She made mistakes, left a trail, but it might take time." Morris clapped Thomas on the shoulder. "You got the tiara back. That was your job. Let us handle the criminal investigation." Thomas returned to London as the sun set, the tiara case secured in his lap. He went straight to the palace where the Lord Chamberlain was waiting. The old man's relief was visible when Thomas placed the case on his desk and opened it. "Extraordinary," the Lord Chamberlain breathed. "I honestly wasn't sure we'd see it again. You've done excellent work, Thomas." Thomas recounted the entire investigation, from Ray Millhouse to Birmingham to Mayfair. The Lord Chamberlain listened intently, occasionally asking questions. When Thomas finished, the old man sat back in his chair. "This will need to be handled delicately. We've recovered the tiara, which is what matters most. The police will pursue Miss Hartley, and I trust they'll succeed. But we need to manage how this story is told, if it's told at all." Thomas frowned. "Shouldn't people know what happened? She nearly got away with stealing a piece of national heritage. And if this becomes public, what happens?" The Lord Chamberlain asked. "We embarrassed the Queen Consort by suggesting her household security was so lax that royal property could be stolen. We create headlines about theft and incompetence. We turn a recovered treasure into a scandal. Is that what the late Queen would have wanted?" Thomas thought about the kind-eyed woman who had once asked about his service. She had valued dignity, discretion, and duty. No, she wouldn't have wanted that. Precisely. So here's what will happen. The tiara will be returned to the collection, with a note that it had been temporarily misplaced during the reorganization following Her Majesty's passing. Mrs. Patterson will review all security protocols at Ray Millhouse, and new procedures will be implemented across all royal properties. The police will continue their investigation of Miss Hartley quietly, and you, Thomas, will return to your duties with the thanks of the Crown. It felt anticlimactic, but Thomas understood the logic. The mission had never been about glory or recognition. It had been about recovering something precious and ensuring it remained where it belonged. He had done that. Before he left, the Lord Chamberlain added, "There will be a formal commendation in your file, and I suspect your commanding officer will find you considered for advancement opportunities in the future. Good work doesn't go unnoticed even when it must remain unspoken." 2 weeks passed before Thomas heard anything more about the case. He had returned to his regular duties, standing guard during state functions and public events. The tiara had been quietly restored to the royal collection, and life at the palace continued as though nothing had happened. But Thomas couldn't stop thinking about Elaine Hartley and the questions that remained unanswered. Then Detective Morris called. We found her. Or rather, she found us. Thomas met Morris at a cafe near Scotland Yard. The detective looked tired but satisfied. Elaine Hartley walked into a police station in Edinburgh 3 days ago and turned herself in. She confessed? More than that. She brought documentation, evidence, the whole story. Morris pulled out a notebook. Turns out she's been working for a criminal network that targets wealthy homes and estates. They place operatives in domestic positions, gather intelligence about valuable items, and steal them when opportunities arise. She's been doing this for 5 years. Thomas felt anger rising. And the royal household's background checks didn't catch this? Her identity was manufactured. The real Elaine Hartley died as a child. Our suspect's real name is Sarah Brennan. She's got a history of small-time theft and fraud, but nothing on the scale of this operation. When she realized we were closing in, she panicked. The network told her they'd protect her if she kept quiet, but she didn't trust them. So she turned herself in and offered to cooperate in exchange for a lighter sentence. What about the £15,000? Thomas asked. She spent about $3,000 on living expenses and getting to Scotland. The rest is in a bank account under another false name. It'll be recovered and returned to Mr. Ashford, though I suspect he's already written it off for tax purposes. Morris smiled grimly. The interesting part is what she told us about the operation. Based on her information, we've identified 6 other homes that were targeted, including 2 other royal properties. Small items mostly, things that wouldn't be immediately missed. But the cumulative value is over £500,000. Thomas absorbed this. How did they get away with it for so long? Because they were patient and smart. Never took too much from one place. Always had plausible explanations if questioned. Sarah says she was the newest member of the team, which is why she got nervous when we started investigating. The older members have decades of experience and connections to sell stolen goods anywhere in the world. Are you arresting them? We're building cases now. Sarah's testimony will help, but these people are skilled at covering their tracks. It'll take months, maybe years, to bring them all down. Morris closed his notebook. But the tiara's back where it belongs, and that's what matters to your people, right? Thomas nodded, but he felt the weight of how close they'd come to losing something irreplaceable. What will happen to Sarah? She'll do prison time, reduced because she cooperated. Probably 3 to 5 years. She's young enough that she'll get out and have a chance at a real life. Assuming she learns from this. After Morris left, Thomas sat alone with his coffee, thinking about the strange path that had led him from palace guard to detective work. He thought about the tiara, now secure in the Tower of London's jewel house, and about Queen Elizabeth, who had worn it with such grace and dignity. The piece would be there for future generations, preserved and protected. That had to be enough. When he returned to the palace that evening, he was summoned to the Lord Chamberlain's office once more. This time the king's private secretary was there as well, a severe woman named Ms. Thornbury who rarely involved herself with operational matters. Mr. Whitmore, she began without preamble, His Majesty has been briefed on the situation regarding the missing tiara and its recovery. He wishes me to convey his personal thanks for your discretion and effectiveness. Thomas stood at attention. It was my duty, ma'am. Duty is common, she replied. Competence and loyalty of the kind you demonstrated are rare. The king has approved a special assignment for you if you're willing. The security protocols for royal property are being completely overhauled in light of what happened. We need someone who understands both the practical and symbolic importance of these items. Someone who can think creatively when situations demand it. The Lord Chamberlain added, You'd be working directly with the Master of the Household's office, helping to implement new procedures across all royal residences. It would mean leaving the guards, taking on an administrative role. Not as glamorous as standing in the red uniform, but arguably more important. Thomas felt the significance of the offer. He had joined the guards because he wanted to serve, to be part of something greater than himself. This would be serving in a different way, but perhaps with more impact. He thought about how easily the tiara had been stolen, how vulnerable the royal collection had been. If he could help prevent that from happening again, wasn't that worth doing? I accept, he said. Ms. Thornbury nodded approvingly. You'll start next month. In the meantime, there's someone who would like to meet you. She led him through the palace to a private sitting room Thomas had never entered before. Queen Camilla was there, standing by a window overlooking the gardens. She turned as they entered, and Thomas bowed instinctively. Mr. Whitmore, she said. her voice kind but firm. "I understand I owe you thanks and an apology. Thanks for recovering the tiara, and an apology that it was ever at risk because of failures in my household's procedures." Thomas didn't know what to say. "Your Majesty, there's no need." "There is every need," she interrupted gently. "I take responsibility for what happened at Ray Mill House. Mrs. Patterson has been devastated, blaming herself, but ultimately the failures were systemic. We all became careless in the chaos following the late Queen's death. That woman, Sarah Brennan, exploited our grief and disorganization." She walked closer to him, and Thomas could see genuine emotion in her eyes. "That tiara meant a great deal to Elizabeth. She wore it on her wedding day, you know. It connected her to her grandmother, and to the history of the family. When I learned it was missing, I was horrified. Not because of what people might think of me, but because I felt I had failed to protect something she treasured." "You didn't fail, Your Majesty," Thomas said carefully. "A criminal targeted you deliberately. But the tiara is safe now, thanks to you." She smiled slightly. "I'm told you're taking on a new role, helping to ensure this never happens again. That pleases me. The crown's treasures aren't just jewelry and ornaments. They're history, continuity, reminders of who we are and where we come from. They need guardians who understand that." Thomas bowed again. "I'll do my best, Your Majesty." After he left the room, Ms. Thornberry walked with him toward the exit. The Queen Consort is more shaken by this than she lets on. She worries constantly about comparisons to the late Queen, about whether she's worthy of the position. This incident fed those fears. "Your discretion in handling it has meant more than you know." Thomas began his new role in December, as winter settled over London and the palace prepared for Christmas celebrations. His office was small but comfortable, tucked away in the administrative wing where he had first learned about the missing tiara. His days were now filled with spreadsheets, security protocols, and endless meetings with staff from various royal residences. The work was tedious at times, but he approached it with the same dedication he had brought to his years as a guard. He reviewed every procedure for how items moved between properties, how they were logged and tracked, and who had access to them. He discovered vulnerabilities everywhere, gaps that criminals like Sarah Brennan had exploited. One morning, he received a package from Detective Morris. Inside was a formal letter from the Crown Prosecution Service, confirming that Sarah Brennan had been sentenced to 4 years in prison, reduced from 7 because of her cooperation. Also in the package was a handwritten note from Sarah herself. Thomas hesitated before opening it. What could she possibly have to say? But curiosity won, and he unfolded the single page. "Mr. Whitmore, I know I have no right to write to you, and you have every right to throw this away. But I wanted you to know that I'm not asking for forgiveness or sympathy. I made my choices, and I'll pay for them. What I want to say is that when you came to Ray Mill House, I knew my life as I'd been living it was over. I could have run further, hidden better. But I was tired of being someone I wasn't. In a strange way, your search for the tiara gave me permission to stop running. I turned myself in because I wanted to face what I'd done, not because I was noble or brave, but because I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I hope that in prison I can figure out who I really am, not who I pretended to be to steal from people. The tiara was the most beautiful thing I ever held in my hands. I'm glad it's back where it belongs. Thank you for being persistent enough to find it." Thomas read the letter twice, then filed it away. He didn't know what to make of it. Sarah had stolen and lied, but she had also been caught in a criminal network that had used her. Her choices were her own, but he found himself hoping that when she got out of prison, she would indeed find a better path. Over the following months, Thomas's work began to show results. New protocols were implemented across all royal residences. Background checks were strengthened with multiple verification layers. Items from the royal collection could no longer be moved without dual authorization and real-time tracking. The master of the household praised Thomas's thoroughness, and slowly, other departments began consulting him on security matters beyond just the jewels. In April, there was a ceremony in the throne room. Thomas was awarded the Royal Victorian Medal for his service to the crown. King Charles himself pinned the medal to Thomas's chest and shook his hand firmly. "We are grateful for your dedication," the king said quietly. "You protected not just property but history and memory. That is no small thing." That evening, Thomas stood alone in the room at the Tower of London where the crown jewels were displayed to the public. He had special access as part of his new role, conducting security reviews. He stood before the case that now held the Cambridge lover's knot tiara, gleaming under carefully controlled lighting. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. A farmhand's son from Yorkshire who had joined the military, then the Royal Guards, and now found himself responsible for protecting treasures that belonged to an entire nation. It seemed improbable, but life had a way of leading people to where they were needed. The tiara sparkled before him, diamonds and sapphires arranged in a pattern that had graced royal heads for over a century. It had survived wars, scandals, and changes in society. It had been stolen and recovered, and it would endure beyond Thomas's lifetime, beyond everyone's lifetime, as long as people continued to value what it represented. A security guard doing his rounds nodded to Thomas. "Beautiful, isn't it? Never gets old seeing these pieces." "No," Thomas agreed. "It never does." He left the tower as the sun set over the Thames, painting the old fortress in shades of gold and amber. Tomorrow he would return to his office, to more meetings and protocols and the endless work of safeguarding history. But tonight he allowed himself to feel satisfied with what he had accomplished. The tiara was home. That simple fact meant more than any medal or commendation. Queen Elizabeth had loved that piece, and now it would be there for future generations to admire and appreciate. Thomas had kept faith with her memory, and with the duty he had sworn to uphold. As he walked across Tower Bridge, he thought about what the Lord Chamberlain had told him months ago. Good work doesn't go unnoticed, even when it must remain unspoken. The general public would never know the full story of the missing tiara, how close it had come to being lost forever, or how one guard's determination had brought it back. That was fine with Thomas. He didn't need recognition or fame. He had served, and that was enough. Years later, when he was an old man, he would sometimes visit the tower and stand before that same display case. Young guards would be on duty, standing at attention as he once had, not knowing the story behind the quiet old man who gazed so intently at one particular tiara. He would smile to himself, remembering that October morning when the Lord Chamberlain had given him an impossible task, and how he had refused to accept that impossibility. The tiara would outlast them all, a reminder that some things were worth fighting for, worth preserving, worth bringing home no matter how difficult the journey. It represented continuity in a changing world, beauty that transcended individual lives, and the idea that we are all, in our own ways, guardians of something greater than ourselves. Thomas touched the Royal Victorian medal he still wore on special occasions and walked away from the tower, disappearing into the London crowds. His story would never be widely known, but the tiara would shine on. Silent testament to the day a loyal guard stepped into a private home to reclaim what belonged to history itself. The late Queen would have approved, he thought. And in the end, that was all that mattered.